Why did the most advanced and luxurious ship of its time, famously called Unsinkable, sink in less than 3 hours? The Titanic's story is not just about a shipwreck. It's about human ambition, arrogance, courage, and tragedy that changed maritime history forever. At the dawn of the 20th century, the world was racing forward. Industry was booming, nations were competing, and ships were growing larger and more powerful. Two companies led the competition across the Atlantic: Cunard Line, famous for the speed of its ships Lusitania and Mauretania, and White Star Line, which decided to focus not on speed, but on size and luxury. In 1907, White Star's chairman J. Bruce Ismay partnered with the American financier J.P. Morgan to create 3 Olympic-class liners: the Olympic, the Britannic, and the Titanic. These would be floating palaces, designed to impress the world. Titanic was built in Belfast, Ireland, starting in 1909. She was a marvel of engineering, 269 meters long, weighing more than 46,000 tons, with 4 massive funnels towering above the ocean. Inside, Titanic was a city at sea, with luxurious dining halls, a swimming pool, Turkish baths, a squash court, and the now legendary grand staircase, crowned with a glass dome. First-class passengers lived like royalty, with private suites, servants, and meals served across multiple courses with fine wines. Second-class passengers enjoyed comfort and amenities that rivaled first class on other ships, while even third class, often the worst section on most liners, had bunks, dining rooms, and sanitation far beyond what many emigrants had ever experienced at home. But the ship had a fatal flaw: lifeboats. Titanic carried only 20 boats, enough for about 1,100 people, less than half of those on board. Maritime regulations were outdated and based on tonnage, not passenger numbers. White Star also didn't want too many lifeboats cluttering the elegant deck space. Still, newspapers called the Titanic unsinkable. Confidence in technology and human progress was at its peak. On April 10, 1912, Titanic prepared for her maiden voyage from Southampton to New York. Thousands came to see her off. On board were some of the wealthiest and most famous people of the age: John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidore and Ida Strauss of Macy's, and Margaret Molly Brown, who would later become famous for her bravery. Alongside them were hundreds of emigrants from Ireland, Scandinavia, and Eastern Europe, chasing new lives in America. Titanic first stopped at Cherbourg, France, where more first-class passengers boarded than Queenstown, Ireland, where hundreds of third-class emigrants crowded aboard. Fully loaded, Titanic carried over 2,200 souls. For the first days, life on board was calm and joyful. The wealthy dined on oysters and filet mignon while listening to live orchestras. Families in second class enjoyed cozy lounges and libraries. In third class, emigrants sang folk songs, danced, and dreamed of America. The sea was calm, the sky clear. Titanic felt unstoppable, but danger lay ahead. On April 14th, as the ship steamed westward, she received multiple iceberg warnings from nearby vessels. Some reached the bridge, but many were delayed or ignored as the wireless operators were overwhelmed with passenger messages. That night, the ocean was eerily still. With no waves breaking against them, icebergs would be nearly invisible in the darkness. At 11:40 p.m., lookout Frederick Fleet spotted a massive shadow ahead. He rang the bell 3 times and shouted, "Iceberg, right ahead." First Officer William Murdoch ordered the ship turned hard to port, and the engines reversed. Titanic groaned as it tried to turn, but it was too late. The iceberg scraped along the starboard side, tearing open 6 compartments below the waterline. On deck, the collision felt like a soft jolt, almost harmless. In the luxury suites, many barely noticed, but below, seawater rushed in with terrifying speed. Thomas Andrews, the ship's builder who was on board for the voyage, inspected the damage. He delivered the grim news to Captain Edward Smith. Titanic could not survive. With 6 compartments flooded, she would sink in 2 to 3 hours. The order was given to uncover the lifeboats. Passengers were woken, told to dress warmly, and come on deck. Many hesitated, unwilling to leave the brightly lit ship for small boats in the freezing night. At 12:25 a.m., the first lifeboat was lowered with only 28 people, though it could hold 65. Time and again, boats were sent down half empty. Officers enforced the rule: women and children first. Husbands kissed wives goodbye. Fathers placed children in boats with trembling hands. Some, like Ida Strauss, refused to leave their spouses, choosing to die together rather than be separated. In third class, passengers faced locked gates, language barriers, and confusing corridors. Many never made it to the lifeboats. Meanwhile, the ship's band, led by Wallace Hartley, gathered on deck and played music to calm the passengers. Survivors later recalled their final song, "Nearer, My God, to Thee." By 1:30 a.m., panic gripped the ship. The bow was sinking deeper, the deck tilting sharply. Funnels groaned, ropes snapped, and passengers scrambled desperately. Officers fired warning shots to maintain order. Still, lifeboats were lowered with empty seats, while hundreds remained trapped aboard. At 2:18 a.m., Titanic's lights flickered. A thunderous roar was heard as a forward funnel collapsed. The ship's back broke, splitting her into two pieces. The bow plunged, while the stern lifted nearly vertical against the night sky. At 2:20 a.m., Titanic disappeared beneath the Atlantic, leaving over 1,500 people in the freezing water. The screams of drowning and freezing passengers filled the night, but within 30 minutes, silence fell. Hypothermia had claimed them. Out of 2,224 passengers and crew, only 705 survived. Most lifeboats had refused to return, fearing they would be swamped. Only one went back, finding only a handful still alive. At 4 a.m., the survivors spotted lights. The RMS Carpathia had raced through the icy waters after receiving Titanic's distress call. For hours, frozen and traumatized survivors were pulled aboard. By 9 a.m., all who remained alive were rescued. In New York, on April 18th, thousands gathered in silence to receive them. Families waited for names, many only to receive the worst news. Investigations in both Britain and the United States revealed a grim truth. Titanic had been sailing too fast, ignoring multiple warnings, and carrying far too few lifeboats. The inquiries forced major reforms in maritime safety. Lifeboats for all, radios manned 24/7, and the creation of the International Ice Patrol. These changes have saved countless lives since. But Titanic's story did not end there. Legends grew. Some claimed the ship had been swapped with her sister Olympic in an insurance scam. Others pointed to the eerie 1898 novella Futility, which told of a giant ship called Titan sinking after hitting an iceberg with not enough lifeboats. The similarities were haunting. In 1985, explorer Robert Ballard discovered Titanic's wreck 2.5 miles beneath the ocean. The once proud liner lay broken and rusting, surrounded by a graveyard of shoes, dishes, and personal belongings. The discovery reignited fascination with Titanic, sparking documentaries, museums, and films. Among the survivors, stories of courage lived on. Molly Brown, who demanded her lifeboat returned to search for survivors, became known as the Unsinkable, the engineers who stayed at their posts, keeping power running until the very end, became symbols of duty and sacrifice. And the band, who played as the ship sank, became legends of calm bravery. Titanic's legacy endures in culture. Films, books, and exhibitions retell the story. James Cameron's 1997 film made it a global phenomenon, reminding millions of the human stories behind the tragedy. Museums across the world display recovered artifacts. Pocket watches stopped at the moment of impact. China plates, letters never delivered. Ordinary objects made extraordinary by loss. But beyond the legend, Titanic remains a warning about arrogance, about blind faith in technology, about the cost of ignoring danger. It is also a story of courage, of those who gave up their seats, of families who chose to stay together, of crew who never abandoned their posts. More than a century later, Titanic still haunts us, not just because of the scale of the tragedy, but because it reflects who we are. It was a symbol of an age that believed nothing could go wrong, shattered in a single night. The Titanic was called unsinkable, yet she sank, carrying with her over 1,500 souls, and reminding us forever that nature is always stronger, and that human ambition must always be tempered by humility. This is the story of Titanic, a story the world will never forget.